I am Claire Mitchell, Doctor of Laws and King's Counsel.
And I am Zoe Venditozzi, Doctor of Laws, teacher and writer.
On the 8th of March 2020, International Women's Day, we launched the feminist Witches of Scotland campaign. The Witchcraft Act, in force between 1563 and 1736, saw thousands of people, mostly women, accused and executed as witches in Scotland, in the country's biggest and most brutal miscarriage of justice. Our campaign had three aims: to get a formal state apology for those accused of witchcraft, to obtain a pardon for all those convicted, and to get a national memorial to remember those involved in the Witchcraft Act.
On International Women's Day 2022, the first of our aims was realised when First Minister Nicola Sturgeon issued a formal state apology to those accused as witches. The first formal state apology ever. We are currently working with politicians to ensure there is legislation passed to pardon those accused as witches, to change their status from convicted witches to those who ought never to have been prosecuted. We continue our work to obtain a national monument so those who suffered will never be forgotten. Join us as we speak to the experts on the witchcraft trials, both here in Scotland and further abroad, as we explore the history of women in Scotland and continue the cultural conversation of what it means to be a woman.
Hello, and welcome to the second episode of the second season of the Witches of Scotland. How are you, Claire?
I'm very well. It's 2-2, Zoe.
2-2. I like that.
Yes.
2-2. How's your mood?
My mood is positive, I would say. Yeah, I would go as far as to say, I wouldn't go as far as ecstatic, but it's definitely on the positive side.
I mean, you know me, I'm a very sunny person. I very much look on the bright side. I've just been talking to somebody who's been quite ill, and they said to me, well, you know, we have to sort of weather these storms and get better. And I said to him, well, as my gran says, it gets worse before it gets better, which as I was typing it, I was thinking, that's just so Scottish. It'll get worse before it gets better.
Aye. Definitely going to get worse.
There is quite good reason to be, shall we say, in the French, fucked off this week after recent events of the weekend. Is that fair to say?
Are we going to go to discussing the news?
You better believe we're going to discuss the news.
News.
We're such simple creatures. I'm sitting here laughing away at that, and I don't know how many times I've heard and seen Claire do that little intermission. It's lovely. It's lovely. Yes, we are going to do the news. And the first thing I'm going to start with is actually something very serious. And sadly, there is no light side to this, right? But it obviously angered, enraged me, and it has done every other single woman that I've seen commenting about it. And it's the news that the Taliban in Afghanistan have now stopped women from attending nursing college and to train as nurses. So what that means is women can't be, as far as my understanding is, women can't be treated by men. So it means there isn't anybody to treat women, except for, I suppose, women that have already qualified as nurses and doctors. But I wonder whether the Taliban will be keeping a close eye on them to stop them. And it made me think about the witch trials, because it's going to be a very similar situation to what women experienced back in the 1600s, 1700s, when there wasn't, you know, formalized medical care, and you were reliant on people in your community that just happened to know, they'd had it passed down how to deliver a baby, or they had kind of folk cures for different things. And it just made me think, it's 2024, it's nearly 2025. Why is there a population in the world where women are being erased in real time in front of our eyes? Like, I mean, what do you do about that?
I know, you've just got to wonder what the rationale is for saying we have half the population, and what we're going to do with half that population is we're going to not let them learn and possibly benefit our community as a whole.
Yeah.
It's just really inconceivable that would happen. I cannot get my head around that idea. I also can't get my head around the idea that people aren't saying, wait a minute, this is never going to work. We're going to drive women's health underground. There's going to be problems with women, you know, in childbirth, as there was in the 16th and 17th centuries. and people are going to die. It just seems an obvious reduction in the way women are treated, women's health, and anybody who's denied an education is denied fulfillment of their entire life.
But I think
Think
the
of all the doctors that will never be, the nurses that will
Taliban
never.
don't care about that, obviously, because presumably the main and driving factor is that women need to be hidden. They're dangerous. I mean, like I do not believe that this is anything other than a male interpretation of what scripture is saying. Like I just think it's completely insane. The idea that women cannot be seen outside, they can't speak to anybody. They're so, what is it? Are they dangerous? I mean, it seems insane to me, but there'll be so many women that are going to die. They're going to really lose presumably quite a big chunk of their population because women will die of things that they absolutely do not need to die of.
Yeah.
It's just insane to me, and I wonder at what point that's going to change. And they obviously have such an incredible, terrifying grip on the population of Afghanistan, and I don't know what can be done to stop this from happening. And like that's not even starting all the women and children that have been killed in what's happened in Palestine. I just think there's just such a massive crisis of people that absolutely should not be involved in these things being killed either directly or they will die of things that they absolutely don't need to die of. It's enough to just make you want to just fucking burn the world down. And I don't understand why more people aren't sort of,
Enraged.
burning with anger. And I know that you just have to get on with your normal everyday life, but it's so hard to do that. And of course we do, because that's what our brains are like as humans. But I just think, oh God, it's hard. It's a hard thing being a human just now, if you're caring. Anyway.
There's a real difficulty and a real disconnect with caring about things and not being able to do anything about them. I
Yeah.
mean, in the inverted commas olden days, you heard months later something had happened, but
Mhm.
it's real time seeing things happen,
Watching it.
yeah, and not and being powerless to do anything
We are
is a real
daily watching
difficulty in the
videos of,
modern
of
day.
children being killed. Like, I just don't understand how we as a nation can have anything to do with that. It makes me just feel really powerless and really, really angry. And I just think it's important that we all speak up about it. It's just totally disgusting.
Well, I
Oh,
think I think I think speaking up is good, and I think that's what we can do.
mm.
Um, I think a few people have been speaking up for, at the other end of the scale, some horrible misogyny that went on this weekend also on the internet.
Yeah,
Not on the same scale
no,
whatsoever.
but very illuminating though, eh?
Yeah,
Very
yeah.
illuminating about a section of society's attitude towards women. You're talking, I presume, about what happened with the women who just passed their PhD
Yeah,
and shared that nice
absolutely.
news.
I know.
He foolishly said, here is a nice thing on Twitter, and of course Twitter X or whatever the fucking hell it's called now. Immediately all the shitbag men of Twitter, they were kind of like, oh, it's so stupid. Why are you doing that stupid thing? Oh my God, girls are so stupid. Oh my God. And what I find really funny about it was her PhD, and she's remained, by the way, incredibly graceful under fire. Like she's amazing. Her PhD has been downloaded like a million times, like
I
literally.
think it's brilliant.
It's
I think that's what the
bananas.
positive thing is. The PhD is about the politics of smell, which is
Yeah.
really interesting.
You know what? But it's really interesting from a feminist point of view, right? Because smell is it's such a like an incredibly dangerous thing, isn't it? Because when you're a teenage girl and you get your period, there's always that fear. I'm maybe telling on myself here, but this is my experience through fiction and talking to friends. That fear when you're quite young that people can smell that you've got your period, and that girls smell of fish. And that's the kind of thing that men say, or some men say and some boys say. And it's a way of keeping girls silent and fearful and in their box, and it's so interesting to me, the politics
Have
of.
you have you ever read Perfume? You will have.
I actually haven't.
What?
Yeah, no, I know of it obviously, but I haven't. That's not one of the books I've read. But I was thinking as well about
I was reading some commentators talking about how the politics of smell is also it's intersectional, because it's also often about racism as well, that some people will say other cultures that smells bad, that's how they smell. So actually I think that it's a really fascinating area of study, that people
It
would
is. I
shy away
mean,
from.
the thing is, it was just a happy woman
Uh-huh.
celebrating an achievement,
Oh,
and
happy
it got
women. No.
an unbelievable pile-on
Ugh.
of horrible, horrible, let's face it, men.
And it was horrible men, and there is a real anti-feminist thing happening just now on Twitter. And I know people say, oh, you should leave it, you should go on Blue Sky, and I get that, but I'm so Scottish, I think, that this is the good side of being Scottish, is that I think that we can often be a bit like a dog with a bone. And I'm
You're
kind of a bit
staying
like,
and fighting.
yeah, I'm not going to go and be like, oh, that's fine. Even though I know probably in my heart it's not going to make an awful lot of difference to anything, but I'm going to keep fighting the good fight until basically I can't do it anymore. And my son, my 16-year-old son, is always calling me a keyboard warrior. And I know why he says that, but I'm not anonymous, like I stand by who I am, and I'm easily searchable. And there's a great, great deal of anonymous men that are like, Jim, 23, 34, 72, 91, whatever, or men calling themselves like such and such, like Fury, or giving themselves gladiatorial kind of status. Like, yeah, right, so you are, pal. Like, these guys are all acting like they're walking around with like a gun in a holster, like they're keeping down the rabble of women, and they're like the new sheriff in town. Get wrecked.
That's you. That's you,
Honestly.
doll. Didn't we? We managed to get into a fight about a man who was explaining to you, Zoe, that your PhD was worthless,
Yeah.
which in a sense he was correct because you haven't got a
I haven't got a
PhD.
PhD, I've got an honorary doctorate, which is really obvious if you Google me even slightly. There's literally nobody else with my name. So if I say something, then you better believe that I'm meaning what I'm saying. I'm not hiding behind anything.
Yeah,
It makes me very angry, as it seems to be my natural status. I'm actually not angry generally. I'm actually very cheerful, like genuinely. But honestly.
but the rage, Zoe.
Thank God for my birch tree full of ravens outside. I look to them and they give me the grace under fire. I look out my kitchen window and they just look at me and they just go, "Come on, girl." And I go, "I know, guys. It's
I
gonna
know,
be
I
okay.
know.
It's gonna be
They,
okay."
they, yeah, they give you support, and that's what a murder of ravens is there for. So
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
think we should say
Hmm.
congratulations to Dr. Ali Louks from the Witches of Scotland.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, and go and download our PhD.
Absolutely. It's very, very interesting, I think, and I think anything that values education's got to be good for me. It's good to be educated. It's good to be curious. And I think people that are anti-education, I think they're the ones that really need the education, actually.
Yeah. And can I say, just as a final note, I think it's really
Yes.
important, and I do it, that people who have, you know, PhDs or have things behind their name, like KC and stuff like that, I think it's good that they put it out there and show
Yes.
people that that's what they're got.
I mean,
It's not about like hiding your light under a bushel or, oh, this isn't important to me. It's like, I've done this, it was bloody difficult, and, here is the result of it.
I'll tell you why I've got doctor in my handle, and I don't use it in work. I don't get the kids to call me Dr. Venditozzi. I'm just Ms. Venditozzi in school. I don't make anybody else do it. But my Twitter handle has got Dr. Zoe Venditozzi, because you remember, like maybe a year or something ago, all the women that had PhDs, they were kind of like, I'm just going to put my title in there because, it's not something that I'd be ashamed of. And it was kind of like a take back space sort of thing. But I've
Yeah.
got written on my bio, that's Dr. quote, activist with a massive chip on their shoulder about schools to you, Ta, podcast, Witches of Scotland, in the mood to burn it all down. Now, I had one guy say to me, "Oh, you're an arsonist." I was like, "Oh, you don't really understand humor, do you?" And a lot of men saying to me, "Oh, why have you got doctor in your title?" Because of people like you, buddy. Because of people
Yeah.
like. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Why not? Why not? Are you a doctor of laws? No.
no, ram it. Anyway, that brings us on to our new feature, Claire. And what is our new feature?
Well, as a result of a poll on
Mhm.
Tinterweb, we decided that we were going to start a new corner here at Witches of Scotland Towers.
Yes.
And it's going to be a new section. It needs, first of all, before I announce it, it needs a musical interlude to identify it. Zoe, have you thought of a musical interlude?
Well, to be fair, you actually said to me earlier, do you have a sound effect? So I haven't made up a tune. I've just got a sound effect.
Oh, dear Lord, what is the sound effect?
Well, do you want to say what it's called first?
No, no, the intro is the sound
Oh, this isn't
effect.
going to work because it's the sound of me doing a puke. I need to work more on this. I need to work more on it. Well, I'll come back to that. I'll make up a tune in between now and next episode. What's
Okay,
the name of
okay.
the new corner?
The new corner is Will You Just Feck Off? And every week we identify someone, or every week that we're on, we identify someone. I mean, to be honest, it'll be difficult to narrow it down, to be perfectly honest with you.
Oh,
But we
Lord.
identify somebody that we just say, Will you just feck off? And who would we be doing that with this week, Zoe?
Oh, who do you think? It's Greg Wallace. Dreadful little git. Honestly, I wonder if this is right up his Straza, because I remember he did that joke ages ago. Anyway, he has been uncovered, quelle surprise, as a what's the best way to put this that isn't going to be slander? As a
Um,
man who's quite happy to make a lot of sexual jokes, has made many of his co-stars and guests feel extremely uncomfortable for his inappropriate sexual chat. Not just bants, but taking it way too far.
well, you see, the It's Just Banter Brigade will be out, and
Yeah, they
they
are.
can just feck off as well. The
They're
It's
all
Just
just sitting
Banter
around in their
Brigade.
stained pants, just scratching their balls, just going, "Oh, it's just a joke. It's just fun. Women can't take a joke. You can't even say, what's that cow going on about these days? You know what I mean? It's that kind of level of absolute shithousery. I'm being quite foul-mouthed tonight. I'm very sorry. We think that Greg Giga can just feck off.
I mean, really, so there were these allegations, 13 allegations, and he came out and said, I have
Initial
dealt with,
initial allegations, I think.
what did you say?
Initial allegations.
Initial, because there's been more.
Yeah, I think so.
So 13 initial allegations where he came out and said, I have met during the course of my working life and dealt with over 4,000 people, and there's only been 13 allegations. It's kind of like, well, Greg, really shouldn't it be zero?
Is it
That's
an
the first thing.
acceptable percentage?
I know. It's kind of like, I don't think that's as good as it sounded in your head when
No,
when you were thinking.
it's
And
really
then,
not.
of course, he went on to make an hugely misogynistic comment that these people that were complaining about were, quote, a handful of middle-class women of a certain age.
Oh God. Honestly, honestly, the
Can, can,
temerity, the
well,
penacity. I
can we
mean,
just break that down as well slightly, right? There's two things here. One, quelle surprise that women of a certain age, who quite frankly have got to a stage where they're they've gone through the 80s, they've gone through the lads mag era of the 90s, they've gone through the noughties, they've probably gone through a marriage, they're probably gone through a divorce, statistically, and
yeah,
they're just at the stage where they're like, will you just feck off with
yeah,
your inappropriate behavior? So
yeah.
that's the middle age and menopause and all the stuff that brings. But middle class women, well, you're just thinking, well, is it a surprise really that women who might be more financially secure, because that's what middle class says to me, or
Mhm.
you've got better contacts, maybe,
Or that's
that
just the kind of people that he meets through film and TV because
that's true.
that's who's
That's
getting
true.
that's who's getting them the jobs, and
Because it actually caused me to have to Google, am I middle class?
Claire,
Because
you're
I
upper
know,
class.
no, but did you say I'm upper class?
You're upper
I know,
class.
because like if you start off as working class and you go to it, and that's your roots, what
Yeah.
makes you change to middle class? And
That's a very thorny sort of a nettle. I don't know if you could put those two things together you can grasp. I know there's different thoughts on it. Yeah.
Okay.
But
Well,
really
I'm
all
not.
it is, he's saying Karens really, isn't he? Like, and I really hate the name, like name calling using the word Karen because it's so ageist, you know, and it just means that no woman has ever got a legitimate concern about anything because there have been some dreadful women that have made, you know, vexatious complaints about things. But the women that are complaining about what Greg Giga Wallace has done to them, they've got every right to do that. And some of the hideous response from the sexists on the internet has been along the lines of, well, why didn't you say it before? Why have you left it so long? What did you do to protect other people? And they're missing the most glaring thing there is, what are the men in these studios doing? Like,
Yeah.
you know, what were they doing at the time? So Greg and John Turode are standing there. Now, it's not all on John Turode's shoulders. There's presumably a producer and directors and other men that are working there. And I know that it's a shaky peg that your coat's on working in TV. You don't know if you're going to get another job. You don't want to fall out of favour and everything. But surely men could turn to another man and say, what the fuck? Like, we're not talking about the 1970s. This is very recent news going back a wee bit. Like, it's not, you know, it's not
Yeah.
in the days of you know, Jim will fix it. And even
Well,
then,
that's what I thought when looking at it and listening to it. They were saying, well, why didn't you say something at the time? And actually, some women did say things at the time.
probably didn't get work again after it, or, you
Yes,
know,
some
people
women
had their
raised
names
it.
on. Mm-hmm.
And the difficulty is seeing the difficulty is seeing after one comment made or to one person or another one comment made to another people is that natural resistance that women have in particular, I think, from raising these sorts of things.
And also, you don't want to be rude. You don't want to be like people go, it was just a joke, or you've maybe not got the joke, or maybe you're actually kind of shy. And remember that on Master Chef, these are chefs that are coming in and competing. They're not TV stars necessarily, or maybe they are TV stars that are doing the one where they do the cooking, but that's completely presumably out with their comfort zone. You know, like these are humans that we're talking about here. And also, as a sidebar, there's been suggestion from some people that he's got undiagnosed autism, and that's why. As a teacher of lots of young people with autism, that's appalling to me. Like, it's appalling. There is no defense of him. You know, being autistic doesn't mean that you sexually harass people, and it's disgusting to have chucked that into the conversation. He's just a dreadful, grubby man, and actually, we need to stop having grubby men.
Well, on that point,
that's the end of Fuck Off Corner. And now we're going to go on we're going to intro our guests for tonight, who are lovely and definitely not in that corner. And they're the team behind the Witch Hunt podcasting campaign. They're going to intro themselves. And we hope that you enjoy this chat, which was recorded as a nice live chat. So it's very kind of off the cuff and nice and relaxed. And it's about what they do and about what we do. So it means that there's a whole new podcasting campaign for you to get interested and involved with if that's piques your interest. And it also means that they're going to be putting this episode out to their listeners in the States. And so hopefully there'll be a bit of traffic in between the two so both know what each other's doing. So without any further ado, here are the Witch Hunt team. Hello and welcome to this extremely special episode of it's a collaboration between us and another podcast from the other side of the pond. So for those of you that know me, I'm Zoe Venditozzi from the Witches of Scotland podcast. We are a podcast based inevitably in Scotland where we talk about the witches that were accused here and then link that to worldwide efforts, which is where our collab comes in tonight. So hello to those of you that know me through the Witches of Scotland podcast, and I'm going to hand over to the other half of this.
Hello from the Witch Hunt podcast. I'm Josh Hutchinson, and I'm here with Sarah Jack, my co-host, and we're an American podcast that covers witch trial history and also talks about modern day witch hunts.
It's so cool because we know of each other obviously through Twitter and we've listened to each other's podcasts, and it's really nice to, I was saying at the beginning, to meet you. Of course, we're not actually sadly in the same room. We're all in different places in Scotland and in the States, but it's nice to meet you. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, it is so special to be here with you. Thank you so much.
Oh, no, thank you, because it's difficult finding time and obviously the time difference and all the rest of it. So I'm really glad that we could make it work. Can you tell
our listeners, your listeners will know this already, but can you tell our listeners what the genesis of your project was and what the form of it is these days?
Right. Our project began as a way to promote the Connecticut Witch Trial Exoneration Project. We were looking to clear the names of those who had been accused of witchcraft in colonial Connecticut. And we devised the podcast to spread the word about that. But since then, it's evolved. We've expanded our coverage to global witch hunts around the world at different periods in time. And we've really been dialed in lately on what's called harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks, which are basically modern day attacks on people accused of witchcraft.
It's broad because you're a few different things then, aren't you? So you're like us, you're a campaign plus a podcast. So what are your backgrounds?
I'm a descendant of Rebecca Nurse, who was hanged in Salem, and also her sister Mary Esty, their grandchildren married. And so I had that little understanding of witch trials for a while. And as I kept working on my family history research as a hobby, I found that I descended from an accused witch in Connecticut. And I wanted to know more. It was really hard to find information about the Connecticut witch trials. I didn't have my nose in a book like I should have, but I was just online checking out what was there, and there was no memorial. So I started looking for the other people that were talking about the American colony witch hunts and trying to understand how does it fit in with what happened in Salem. And so the exoneration project came out of a group of us coming together, trying to find out, what can we do to move things forward in Connecticut for an apology. And Josh has a long social media history with witch trial work, and he came on board and was a huge help. And that is when the podcast was launched.
It's wild to me and to Claire that you're able to trace yourself back to the nurse story. I mean,
Amazing.
because in Scotland we can't really do that. There isn't the chain of, the way that you're so much more organized in America, presumably because it was quite a new thing. So people were recording everything as they went. Whereas in Scotland, some stuff exists, but it's very hard to prove. So sometimes people will say, oh, I'm descended to such and such. And you're like, well, you might be. Like, you've got the same name and your family come from the area, but you can't prove it conclusively. But we know that you can in the States, which is just mind-blowing to me. We often give talks where we'll say to people, the chances are if your family are generations way, way back in Scotland, you may very well be related, because there's only about 1 million people in Scotland at that point. Or more likely, you're probably related to somebody who was involved in accusing or executing somebody that was accused in Scotland. And I think that gives us pause for thought, but it's hard to prove. So for you to have that direct link, to me, is just like mind-blowing. And not to just one accused, but then another as well in a different location. It's mental to me.
Josh has even more than I do.
Oh, Josh, please tell.
Okay. My story with witch trials goes back to when I was in high school. One summer, I did a trip with my family to Massachusetts, and my grandfather was from a town called Danvers, which used to be Salem Village. So that was the epicenter. And we went to the Rebecca Nurse homestead, and there's a monument to people who signed a petition in defense of Rebecca. And my ancestor, Joseph Hutchinson, is on there. And the way that they wrote it was JOS''H. So it practically said Josh. And it always stuck with me. So
I just got shivers down my back there, Josh. Genuinely, that's so weird.
Yeah, it was such an experience. But I later found out that I'm descended from Rebecca Nurse's sister, Mary Esty, and also several dozen people who were involved on either side. As you said, you're more likely to be related to somebody who was an accuser because they outnumbered the defendants usually.
Interestingly, I have a theory. I don't know if it has any basis. Let me tell you what
Please
it
come out with
is.
your wild theory. I love a
I
wild
will. I'll
theory.
just, but it's good we've got these experts here.
Just
I
accept.
have a, I have a theory that one of the reasons that people are remembered and that you've been able to go down the generations is because it wasn't that long after people had been accused that the chat about exoneration started. And therefore, people had that recognition and agency. So it was, my family member was wrongly accused and convicted, or my family member, unfortunately, the few people who were executed. And therefore, that passes down the generations as something, that you recall happening in your family. Whereas in Scotland, there wasn't that acceptance there'd been a miscarriage of justice, and there wasn't that, as it were, almost public vindication. Do you think that's maybe a reason why you guys do remember your ancestors better than we do?
That is definitely a reason why we remember our Salem ancestors, because 10 years after the trials, everybody submitted petitions to have their attainders reversed and their names cleared and to receive some sort of restitution payments. So the effort to get the restitution took another decade. So it just kept perpetuating. And then around the revolution, and he's not related to me, but Governor Thomas Hutchinson in the 1760s wrote a history of Massachusetts and had a very long chapter about Salem. So it's just was passed down generation to generation.
It's just so different to Scotland. And I think some of that is because Scotland, it was over a couple of hundred years. The numbers were obviously much, much bigger. And I think that there was a certain amount of stigma, obviously, for people that were accused. Naturally, you would expect that. But then I think that there must have been shame driving a lot of the people that were involved in the accusations as well, that just then wanted just to forget about it. But we have spoken to some experts that have said that, so in some areas of Fife, which is where I live, Fife to me is a big county. Kind of, to you it'd be just like a neighborhood. You'd be like, you would drive there to go and pick up takeout or something. Do you know what I mean? You'd be like, it's nothing. Distance is nothing in the States. I know that because some of my family are American, and I know that they'll drive 2 hours to go out for dinner, whereas we'd be like, oh, you'd need a hotel if you were going to go there. That's quite a serious endeavor. But Fife is, to me, quite big. So to you, if you look at the map, you'll be like, that's nothing. That's just a tiny little county area. But Fife has got lots of little villages, and Fife was very involved in witchcraft accusations and witch hunts. And we talked to some experts that said that some of those villages who have retained families that have been there for hundreds of years, there's still a fear in some parts of the community. And I'm not talking necessarily about the young ones now, and obviously not people that have moved in, but people that are many generations long families, that there is maybe still an idea from some people, which, I mean, I don't know if that's true or if that just makes a good kind of tourism story. But I think that there is something where that they don't want to discuss it, that it's been put to rest. And I do know that when they were looking at doing a memorial down in the bottom of Fife in a place called Couris in Torryburn, that a lot of locals were not keen for a memorial, apparently, we were told by campaigners, because they were just kind of like, leave the past. That's terrible. We don't want to talk about that. But I think that you guys are very much on the same page as us, which is, you have to talk about the bad stuff in history. You can't just pretend it didn't happen. You need to bring it out into the light. And that's no more obvious than what the recent interviews that you've been doing about what's happening in other countries. So it's still obviously an issue, it's still a problem. Have you been shocked to discover what's happening in the modern day?
We were a bit shocked when we first learned about it. After we had started Witch Hunt, a gentleman named Damon Leff from South Africa, he runs a campaign against witch hunting, and he contacted us, and that's when we first started to learn about it. Mm-hmm. And very quickly, we learned how large of a problem it is. The United Nations put out a report that they have reports from at least 60 nations and involving tens of thousands of individuals. So it's very epic in scope. And it was a surprise to learn just how widespread it is. It's every continent has it.
And do you find in Scotland, it was round about 85% of the accused were women? Is it similarly gendered with the people you've spoken to in different countries?
It's very gendered with most of the people that we've spoken with. There are some pockets, I believe, in Papua New Guinea where men are considered to be sorcerers. And but as a rule, it's generally 80 to 90%. We talked to a gentleman from India who said 97% were women, and the 3% men were related to the women. They were supporters of them, and that's how they got caught up in it.
Which is similar to what happened in Scotland. Often the men were, husbands or sons or brothers or whatever, or friends or neighbours. They're just in the wrong place at the wrong time, sort of thing. It's wild, that, isn't it? Because we've focused a lot on different African countries because of Leo Igwe, who obviously runs advocacy for accused witches out in Africa. And we were talking to him the other night. We did a Zoom with him from Nigeria, and it doesn't seem to be something that's abating. It just seems to be something that seems to be getting worse, if anything.
You have, yeah, sorry, Sarah.
No, go ahead. You go, Josh.
Okay. Yeah, you have like multiple reasons for that. There's climate change that's driving some accusations because of all the weather events that are happening. There's more droughts, there's more heavy storms that destroy crops. And when people are desperate, that's when they start pointing fingers at people for witchcraft. So you have that, you have things like the refugee crisis and migration that are carrying beliefs. And yeah.
And how do you find people in the States have taken to your efforts around Connecticut? Have people been interested, or do they think it should be left in the past, or are people quite engaged with it?
I would say my experience with Connecticut is there's like a timid, I can't spit this word out, let's say it again. I should have picked a different word, but they're timid about looking at that history. I think about how, the Salem executions were like really towards the end. Many of those who were executed probably didn't expect to be. That's a real different history than in Connecticut. There was a pretty high execution rate. And it was just...
Sorry to interrupt, but can you tell us what happened in Connecticut? Can you kind of give us a potted history, just in case people haven't listened to that in your podcast yet?
Right. In Connecticut, the first hanging was in 1647. A woman named Alice Young was executed, and she was the first of anyone in the American colonies to be hanged for witchcraft. And I emphasize hanged, not burned. The colonies here did hangings. But she was the first, and then within several years after that, 6 more individuals were accused, and they were 100% convicted and executed. So Connecticut was 7 for 7 starting out at the gate. And then things kind of moderated in the 1650s, but then you had a Hartford witch panic in 1662 and 1663, where another 4 individuals were hanged. So you had 11 individuals total hanged in Connecticut in about a 16-year time period, where Massachusetts in that time period only executed 4 people. So it was worse to be in Connecticut.
Right. And was Connecticut a very big population at that point? I mean, surely there weren't that many people living there.
The towns at the time, the biggest towns might have had a couple thousand people, but most of the towns were just, a couple hundred people. So it wasn't very big. And Salem wasn't very big. Salem Village was 525 people or so. Yeah. But 156 people end up being accused. So
hang on, sorry, just just to ask you to repeat that. So there was about 525 people lived there, and 100 odd people were accused. Do you mean in that town?
I mean, no, 156
Jeez,
people
I was like, what?
from, sorry, that's the total from
Across.
all of the Salem, which covered dozens of towns.
Right, okay.
Yes.
I was like, that's a much bigger story than I realized it was. It was already right, okay. And what do you think of the accusations at that point in Connecticut? Like what was going on there that these accusations occurred?
Well, there were epidemics that swept through periodically, and women would be blamed for causing those. And there was fear of warfare with the Dutch, who were neighbors, and with the Native Americans. They were constantly in this state of fear, and it was the little ice age, and the weather was terrible, and sometimes the crops didn't come out. So there's a lot of finger pointing about livestock crimes, and crimes involving children were very big reasons for witchcraft accusations.
Now, do you mean crimes involving children falling ill and dying, or children being accused of being witches?
For the most part, it was children who died in Connecticut. I believe the youngest person involved was 13 who was accused, and that's another relative of Sarah, Winifred Benham Jr. And but by the time you got to the Salem witch panic, a 4-year-old child was accused of witchcraft and imprisoned in a dungeon. They made special shackles for her to chain her to the wall for 7 months. What? And she hasn't received any apology. She didn't get restitution. There's been no real acknowledgement. So we also have the Massachusetts Witch Hunt Justice Project going, and we're trying to get exonerations for everyone who was accused in Massachusetts, an exoneration for everyone who was convicted, and an apology to everybody who was ever prosecuted.
Your legal system is obviously different to ours, so we can't get an exoneration. Claire, you can maybe explain that, because people often, I think, have an American filmic idea of what we can get done, but our system is obviously different to yours.
Yeah, no, a lot of the time when people are interacting with us on social media, Americans say, you're asking for the wrong thing, you shouldn't get a pardon, because a pardon presupposes they've done something. You're looking for an exoneration. And I say, I wish we could get that. Our system doesn't allow that. So the best that we can get is a pardon, but a pardon that makes it clear that they accept the basis for it was that they ought never to have been convicted of anything. But I'm interested to work out why it was that some people were pardoned, some people weren't. For example, why was the 4-year-old girl, why was she not pardoned?
She was never convicted. So she was never pardoned.
That makes sense.
Right.
Of all the people you can't exonerate are people who are never convicted, but you said she also never got any money as well, any compensation. Is that again because it's tied to the conviction?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Most of the individuals who received compensation were convicted and jailed, and the ones who received exoneration were the ones who were condemned.
Okay. So she was released, the 4-year-old, after 7 months of being held. I mean, I wonder, I'm a teacher and I work a lot with kids that have had trauma, and I just wonder what impact that had on that wee girl. Like, how could you possibly move on after being held for 7 months? And presumably, I mean, I'm imagining treated really badly if they thought she was a witch. Like, I can't imagine they looked after her very carefully. Because I know that in Scotland, the theory was that once you had become a witch, that you weren't really a human anymore. You were the devil's puppet kind of thing. So they did, that was one of the ways, I think, in which the people that did the accusing and the executions were able to kind of live with what it was they were doing, because they didn't view them as being real people anymore. Was that similar in America?
Yes. And Dorothy Good, the 4-year-old, was also imprisoned with her mother, Sarah Good. And Sarah had an infant who was less than a year old who died in the jail. And Sarah Good herself was executed. So Dorothy grew up without a mother. She had been through all this trauma. She'd been there with her mother, and then her mother's taken away. So it was deeply traumatic. And her father filed a petition later on saying that she was ungovernable, that because of the trauma, she couldn't basically take care of herself.
She will have had the most tremendous like PTSD. That there's no way, like at that age. Oh my goodness. And have you ever had anybody get in touch with you that's descendants that might be a descendant of that little girl?
There are descendants of Sarah Good. There are good descendants.
Right.
But history on Dorothy is still being evaluated, but there has been really interesting recent discoveries on her possible, we might know how things ended for her now. Josh, do you want to talk about that?
Right. We know that Dorothy did end up bearing 2 children, and we don't know who the fathers are for those 2 children. The children were taken away as infants and placed as indentured servants until they grew of age. And so she grew up, Dorothy lived without her children. Her father wasn't very good to her. She just had a pretty miserable life, and she ended up being warned out of town, and she would move to another town, and then they'd warn her out. And she may have died alone in a field in Connecticut.
Well, that's so awful. You can really, it's so many hundreds of years ago, but you can really feel that, I think, as a connection to what that'd be like. I've got children, and just the thought of losing a baby, if you were, first of all, being imprisoned at all, and being in prison with a baby and a 4-year-old, and then losing your infant, and then knowing that you're going to die and that wee girl's going to be left on her own, just like you can't even get your head around that. So I presume people can really connect with stories like that and think, yeah, I can see the reason why this needs to be brought out into the light, and we need to learn about things like this.
Can I circle back, Sarah, and ask, in light of what we've just heard and how enraging that is and how outrageous, why is it that people are timid in coming forward? Why do you think there's this sort of resistance?
There's a lot of layers to that. One is there's a lot of, male history there that they're proud of. Secondly, there's
for the purposes of the podcast, everyone just there and looked and all nodded. Just that doesn't really come across.
Yeah, male history. Yeah, we've heard
that. And then one of the things that really kept coming up with us, with the legislation that was getting voted on and moving through the General Assembly, was there was still a lot of misunderstanding about what the conviction was for. And there appeared to be a lot of fear around witchcraft still. When testimony was given by descendants asking for the politicians to vote yes to move this bill to the House, one of them demanded that there be proof that the woman who was convicted had not had a covenant with the devil.
I mean, that I remember that at the time, and I think Claire and I spoke about that on our podcast, and we're just kind of like, are you completely bonkers? Like we're at a stage now. I mean, what was that? Was that 2022 maybe, or is that 23? Where we were kind of like, we don't believe in witches in that way anymore. Like, that's insane. But and I'm sorry to say this, and I am saying this with full knowledge that our government is absolutely appalling. Okay, the Westminster are just dreadful, but we've got so many stories coming out of the States where we're kind of like, and now these Americans have done this crazy thought, and this crazy thing's happening. And I think part of it is because America is enormous compared to us, and there's such a huge array of things that go on there, and it's so complex.
But when that came out, when I was a kid, you used to get like bits on our news saying things, it was called Only in America. And then there'd be this completely bonkers story and you'd be like, and the Americans did this. And it was one of those Only in America moments. We were like, are you mental? You're a man in today, in the 21st century, saying, can you prove she didn't have a covenant with the devil? Like, I can't even get my head around that. You might think it privately, but to go out in public as a politician and say that with a straight face is really actually scary. Like, it's initially laughable, but then you think, but there must be people that think like he does, that do believe that's happening.
And they also really believed that for these women to have been accused of being witches, then they were for sure bad people anyways. So why exonerate someone who was a bad person?
Oh my God. You can't convict people just for being bad people. They actually need to break laws. Sorry.
What I would be interested in, I kind of remember he slightly rode back from that, didn't he? He was like, oh, I didn't mean witches were real. I mean, there needed to be some evidence. It's like, yeah, whatever. You wanted proof. But there's a rise in the US, and I wondered if you'd considered this or will be considering it in the future. There's a rise of the pastors who are going viral for saying, there's a witch in the community. There's a witch amongst us. I don't know if you saw the pastor who was talking about his wife, and they had a book club, and he was saying, my wife knows that, was speaking to her friends in the book club, and there are newcomers to town. We know who they are. They're witches. It's like, oh my God, this is just like a playbook of how to find outsiders and start blaming them for problems in your community. Do you guys see the rise of these pastors, and is it a scary thing?
We're starting to collect data in general on the way we see crimes happening, accusations happening in the country, so that there's something to look at, because it's still it's like slippery to people. They don't realize how prevalent a lot of the stuff is in our country.
Yeah. And also, I think it's tied up with money as well, isn't it? Because churches obviously don't pay tax, so anybody can set up a church, and that's a way to get people in. It's really grabby, like it's a big story, and the supernatural is much more interesting than just straightforward. Just be nice to your neighbor. Like I think it's much more grabby to say evil is abroad, and I'm the person that can save you from it. There's like a big hero thing going on as well there, I think.
Could we not start up like another church? Does it need to be a religious church? I'm just thinking, we could start up like
There is a religion in America that's not religious, isn't there? There's one that's, I can't remember what it's quite mainstream. We don't have it in the UK as far as I'm aware. And people get together and it's like in church, but it's not really religious. That's so vague, and you're both going, what are you on about? I will research this, I'll get back, because my sister-in-law, that's the church that she attended growing up, but it's not actually a religious church, but it's all the good stuff about religion. It's quite strange. Anyway, sorry, that's another one of those crazy things. Now, I'm aware we've only got about 5.5 minutes left. Can you tell us, and then we'll tell you, where are you up to with like your legal cases and that side of things?
With the Massachusetts Witch Hunt Justice Project, we're working with a state representative, Andy Vargas, from Haverhill, Massachusetts, to have legislation introduced in the next session, which doesn't start until January. They'd run a 2-year session in their general court. So we're waiting for the 2025, asking people to sign a petition at change.org/witch trials. And then we're also working on getting a memorial built in Connecticut. And we've been tentatively given some approval to submit designs.
Oh, wonderful. So, yeah. That's so cool. And who will fund that? Is that the state, or do you have to fundraise for that?
We'll need to do a mixture of probably some state grants and maybe a bond issue and individual donations.
Okay, because your system's quite different to ours for that, isn't it, Claire?
Yeah, unfortunately so. Can I also ask, can anyone sign the petition? So can our listeners sign the petition, or do they have to be in the US?
Anyone in the world can sign it.
Oh, we'll
Cool.
definitely share that then with our listeners as well.
Thank you.
That's so cool, because we're at the stage now where we had a politician in the Scottish Parliament who was taking it forward, and we'd done a public, well, we hadn't, they'd done a public consultation. And then that MSP, the Member of Scottish Parliament, was then promoted to the Cabinet. And the rules here are that if you're in the Cabinet, which is, I suppose, ostensibly you've got more power, they're not allowed to do that type of work anymore. So it kind of fell to nobody. So we're in the process. We've got a fantastic colleague who's beavering away trying to get somebody else to take that up just now. So she's looking into that. And I've heard today, Claire, that she's been told that the public consultation is going to be made available. It's going to be published within the next month. So we should have some news about that, which we'll do. And as soon as we have it, we'll put it out.
Brilliant. Yeah, it was going to be published, and we kept saying it's going to be published. We hear it's going to be published. And then Natalie Dawn, MSP, was unable to do it anymore. So it basically just sat there in abeyance. But thankfully, it's kicked back in and it's moving again now.
Yeah. And you know what it's like with politics, it's hard to get people sort of involved in things that are happening right now. People are, I don't know about with you guys, but in the UK, people are pretty apathetic. So it's hard to get people involved. So when you're talking about something that happened hundreds of years ago, you've obviously got even more of an issue with that. So, but we're hoping that we will have an MSP that's going to pick it up and that we'll progress. Our memorial plans are, we've got some ideas. But the problem that we have in Scotland is that the government have said to us, we're largely supportive, but we're also completely poor and can't give you any money for it. So that's more of a problem, because Claire and I 100% do not have time to fundraise. So that would have to be, I don't know how that would work, unless we just had a benefactor that went, here's £1 million. And then that would be...
Any benefactors listening? Any benefactors?
Never
have multi-millionaires, I mean, feel free.
Yeah, but that's where we're at there. But we still think it's incredibly important to have a memorial, presumably for the same reasons as you guys, but just so that it's marked, so that people can learn about it without realizing that even happened necessarily, if they would just came across the memorial and then learned about it through that. But also just because women's history just isn't marked, and sad to say, the witch hunts was mostly a story about women being treated terribly, and there were obviously men too, but mostly women. So that's why we think it's important. But it's been really nice talking to you and actually connecting like this.
This was awesome.
You too.
Thank
you so much.
Yeah, really we've been watching you, Josh. I've been watching you on TikTok.
Really?
But yeah, whenever it comes across. So Zoe, take a leaf out of Josh's book. He tells as they go. I'm not actually personally, although I joke, I'm not actually personally on TikTok much anymore. But if I occasionally switch it on, because I follow you, I think you come up in the feeds and I listen to your TikToks. So
I'm a high school teacher, and if I did TikToks, it would be just horrendous. It'd be horrendous.
It would.
They'd start talking in my class.
So people can follow you on TikTok as well, is what I'm saying, as well as all the other socials.
So I'm going to say goodbye, but it's more like an adieu, because I think we should do this again. So it'd be really nice to catch up again and get even more of a story. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
So as we usually do at the end of the podcast, we look at somebody who was accused during the witch trials, and so we can remember them. And I thought that tonight, because we've had such a big tear about how dreadful men are, that actually, so nobody could accuse us of just being one-horse ponies, that we'd actually look at a case of a man that was accused. So I was having a look through the Scottish survey, and I came across somebody who the name just jumped out at me, because actually he has the same name as my deceased father, and his name was David Johnston. So he was accused on the 11th of June, 1661, and he was accused. It says the characterization is demonic. They both said demonic for both primary and secondary characteristics. And it names an investigator in this case called John Maitland, and 3 witnesses called James Hodge, James Wickedshaw, which is a great name for a witch hunt, and James Byers. And it says that he was given the mark of the devil when the devil put his finger on his leg, And it was a meekle, grim man in black clothes. And the demonic pacts were anti-baptism. He became a servant of the devil, and he was given a new name, which was William, which, even creepier, is my dad's middle name and my granddad, his dad's name, which is quite strange. There were witches meeting with the devil present and dancing, and they met in Walmot Bank and Boroughmuir. So that's quite interesting. Now let me see. The verdict was, it doesn't have any details. There aren't any further details for him, which is quite frustrating, actually. It's not recorded, which is strange when there's so much detail already. This happened in Musselburgh, by the way, and there wasn't a confession. But I can't see anything here saying, does say he was executed. I'm sorry, it does say he was executed on the 30th of July, 1661. So it was just a couple of weeks later. And it said he was strangled and burned, but there's no further post-trial notes. There were other witches that were accused at the same time as him, and they were Margaret Dalis, William King, and Walter Cowan. So in fact, there was 3 men and a woman in this particular case. And I think what I'll do is I'll go on and read a little bit more and see if this was initially that it was Margaret Dalis, maybe that was accused and they got drawn in, or if it's a different story altogether. So today we remember David Johnston, but we'll also remember Margaret Dalis, William King, and Walter Cowan, who were accused in 1661 of being witches in Musselburgh. So that's this week's episode. And we are so delighted that you have listened and chosen to spend some time with us again, despite us rambling at times. We would say, as usual, please come and find us on socials. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. We're not on Blue Sky yet. And I don't know if we'll go on there. I don't know if it becomes sort of unmanageable having too many sort of platforms. I don't know what you
TikTok.
think. Pardon?
TikTok.
We're also on TikTok. Claire,
we have to go on
us
TikTok.
To make a TikTok. I'm so embarrassed. I don't want to make it.
Listen, like, it's like everybody's doing it, Zoe.
Yeah, well, if you know, just because people are doing it doesn't mean you have to do it, Claire. You know. But yes, we will make a TikTok at some point. Maybe we'll do a Christmas TikTok.
Now, speaking of matters Christmas, can I ask people for 2 things on my Christmas list?
A little baby Jesus.
The first is that, as you know, we have a book coming out, How to Kill a Witch, A Guide for the Patriarchy. Spoiler, it might not be for the patriarchy. If you are thinking of getting that as a gift, can you please pre-order it? The reason why is that our publisher has told us that the amount of pre-orders that you get are really, really important for how well the book does and how many people get to see it. So we obviously want as many people as possible to see it and to get it. And therefore, if you are thinking about getting it, could you please pre-order? We also have in the bag some ideas about pre-ordering, including perhaps doing an online event where entry is required by showing a pre-order, or also live events in respect of a pre-order. And we're also thinking of doing a Patreon show for those that have pre-ordered. So if you pre-order now, as long as you've got proof of pre-ordering, then when we get those things in place, we will be inviting you to those sorts of things. But we haven't got sorted out what those things are going to be just yet.
Yeah, I mean, if you, for when the book comes out as well, obviously we want to tour and come and like visit people. We know we've got fans and, you know, listeners all over the place. Fans, I'm sure maybe we wouldn't say fans. Fans. The only fan around here is me. Listeners, I suppose.
Fellow quarrelsome dames.
Feel like I've been a bit of a show off there now. I'm Scottish and I'm going to fall and break my leg or something. But people that are interested, okay, shall we say,
we'd love to come and visit people, like wherever that may be. And I think if we can prove there's an appetite, then we can plan a kind of a tour of sorts. So the book comes out in May. So if there's anybody here that has an appetite for us to come and talk where they are, then give us a shout. We'd love to make that happen. So just contact us through any of our socials and hopefully we can do that. That'd be nice.
Fantastic. And the second thing, because I am greedy for things today, the second thing is, if you enjoy the podcast and you like our chat, please could you go on and review the podcast and give us 5 stars?
You can't tell people how many stars to give in a review. They might.
I feel, it would be pointless to say, could you go on and give me 3 stars, please?
Yeah.
This is an average podcast that I've been listening to.
Okay, if you don't like the podcast, why are you listening? But if you
exactly, stop podcast, and don't review.
If you do like the podcast, give it a review. If you're a bit, then that's okay. You don't
let
need
it go.
Anything. You can just and move on and find a different podcast.
I think if people have managed to struggle through to this point, Zoe, you can probably imagine that they are broadly in favour of the podcast.
Well, let's hope so. Let us hope so. Okay.
Zoe, have you reviewed our podcast at all?
Our podcast?
Yeah.
Why would I review your podcast?
Well, I'm just wondering, if you did review the podcast, would you give it 5 out of 5?
I'm not sure I would give it 5 out of 5. Because, I think I'm funny, but not everybody thinks I'm funny, as evidenced by some men on Twitter who definitely don't think I'm funny.
I'm laughing.
Well, that's good. It's good to have a friend, I think. Okay, I need to away and make myself an omelette.
Nice.
Rock and roll.
That's the kind of detail that the listeners tune in for every 2 weeks or thereby.
Well, listen, I have to have an omelette because the raccoons and the ravens are training. So I've got to get them on a high protein diet. So my understanding is they start the day with Greek yogurt and peanut butter. And then they get some sort of tofu confection at lunchtime because they're vegetarian. And then in the evening, we have eggs. So
I'm bringing an end to this madness, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see.
People like to hear how they're getting on. People are invested in my menagerie of our lettered creatures.
Yes.
Not rats, obviously.
Oh, I like rats.
Do you?
Yeah.
No, I'm just about raccoons and ravens.
I'm crows and other corvids.
We'll see about that. Okay. We'll see you, hopefully. You'll hear from us, hopefully, in another 2 weeks.
Yeah, that didn't sound like a threat at all.
No. And who is it next? We can't tell you, but I'm just thinking we've got a couple of really good ones in the bag. So we'll have another one in 2 weeks, and we're just going to keep up the energy.
Yeah, can you also, listeners, if you can think of anyone that you would really, really like to put in, can you just feck off corner, or will you just feck off corner?
Yes.
Do get in contact and let us know.
Yes. Likewise, if there's any guests that you think could be really good, you can always give us a shout, because we're not the only people that know about witches stuff. We don't know everybody that's on the internet or doing really interesting work. So if there's anybody you know of, give us a shout. I'd really like to get Margaret Atwood on, but it's nigh on impossible to get Margaret Atwood. And so if anybody here has a contact for her, because she is an originator of a lot of the stuff that we've done. And actually, I'm just going to say, a big part of definitely my grown-up adult psyche is from some of her early fiction. I'd love to speak to Margaret Atwood, and so would Claire. So if anybody's got a contact, come on.
Just put it out there in the universe, Zoe. That's what we'll do.
Manifesting Margaret. Okay, thank you very much. And we will see you, you'll hear us next time.
Kind regards.
Ciao, ciao.
If you'd like to learn more about the Witches of Scotland, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for our mailing list at www.witchesofscotland.com to keep updated with the campaign. On that site, you'll be able to find how to link with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.